Hi, I'm John Rogers. I created the show Leverage and wrote Transformers, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
You're listening to GenreTainment. And here are your hosts, Marx and Julie.
Hello everyone, this is GenreTainment and we're your hosts, Marx
and Julie. On today's episode, we're chatting with award-winning director Dan Attias. Dan has worked as a director since 1984. Good year. Directing episodes for The Wire, The Sopranos, Homeland, Alias, New Northern Exposure, Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, awesome. The Boys, yeah. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Ooh, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and more.
He directed one of the first horror films I ever watched, Stephen King's Silver Bullet. We talk about many of those projects in his new nonfiction book, Directing Great Television Inside TV's New Golden Age.
We had a fun time chatting with him about how he started his career at first in acting and then found his way into directing. He shares some great stories from set and tips from his book.
Now, before we get in this episode's interview, I do want to apologize. We've been on hiatus so long.
Yeah.
It's been a blur for us between some illness in the family and many projects back to back.
Yeah, some of that's on me. Speaking of projects, Cabot Crossing Publishing published its first book.
Yep, that's us.
Yes, but in case you didn't know, Cabot Crossing Publishing is us. So our first book, Dragons of a Different Tale, 17 Unusual Dragon Tales, is out in stores.
Ooh.
Yeah, so here's the description. It's 18 award-winning veteran and emerging authors bring you 17 unique dragon tales that defy tradition. Winged serpents as large as continents, as well as those tiny enough to perch on the fingertip of a young girl. Dragons who inhabit the Wild West, Victorian London, Brooklyn, and a post-apocalyptic Earth. Scaly beasts who fight in the boxing ring, celebrate Christmas, and conquer the vast void of outer space. There are rock stars who meddle with dragon magic, clever and conniving shapeshifters, and powerfully exotic hybrids. Science fiction, urban fantasy, mystery, western, epic fantasy, YA fantasy, no matter the setting or the genre, here be dragons. And just in case you were doing the math, it's 17 tales but 18 authors because Marx and I did our first co-writing, escapade. that we've ever done. Rather than him writing and me editing, we actually co-wrote our short story, and that is The Wild West, which I am very, very proud.
Yeah, a Wild Beast of the West is the name of it.
Yes, A Wild Beast of the West is the name, and I'm really, really proud of it.
In the Wild West with dragons.
Yes, so you got cowboys and cowgirls riding dragons and shooting six guns. What else do you need?
Yeah. Super proud of the book. Not only does it have the stories, but also behind the scenes stories from the authors, which is something a little different for anthologies. And you can find links to all your favorite online stores to buy the book at books2read.com, Dragon's Tale.
And that's books2read.com/Dragon's Tale. So the 2 is the number.
Now we also have my urban fantasy series, Obsidian Monsters. It's currently coming out on Kindle Vella.
Yes.
Julie's doing a great job editing those episodes.
A little behind at the moment, but getting there again.
Anyway, these things in real life stuff have made the podcast tough to do lately, but we're starting to get caught up. There's some excellent episodes coming, including our traditional end-of-the-year crossover episode with SFP Now, talking about the best movies, TV series, and more from 2021. We also have an SFP Now episode currently on their feed with us on there with some of the other authors of the anthology too.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And in January we'll also have episodes with some of the authors from the anthology on here. So
we just had a bit of a bottleneck. The bottleneck has opened.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to do an anthology, oversee all that.
It was a little more than we thought.
Publish. I learned a lot of new stuff.
To be fair, it was a little more work than we'd anticipated. So we can't wait to share all of that. But right now, let's get to our interview with Dan Attias. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
All right. Well, before we discuss your new book, Directing Great Television Inside TV's New Golden Age, let's talk about your origin story. What started you down this path that led to directing TV, I guess since the 1980s, right?
That's right.
The good days. The 80s and the 90s, the good old days.
I was kind of at loose ends when I graduated college as an English major, and I'd gotten into law school, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I gravitated towards doing some acting workshops, and that led to, for about 3 years, I studied to be an actor, was in some plays, really liked it, and wound up in film school, kind of in a circuitous way. And I had to make a film as part of that. And that was kind of an epiphany because I realized I'm much better suited to be behind the camera because I didn't really get in my own way the way I would as an actor. I'm very self-conscious as an actor. It was great when I happened to be just in the right mood for the part. It's hard for me to kind of, I had a pretty good understanding of what a scene required, but bending my, twisting my insides around to fit the moment was more difficult for me. And I made a short film, and that was kind of an epiphany. Okay, this is what I want to do. And then I was transferred into an MFA program. And I saw a lot of career film students there who just were kind of big fish in a small pond. And I realized, well, I don't want to hang around here forever. And I didn't have a thesis film that I wanted to make yet. So I got into something called the Assistant Directors Training Program, which the Directors Guild of America operates. And I figured I'd apprentice myself to good directors on my way to becoming a feature film director. That was my wish. This was in the 70s, and that was like independent films were fantastic then. That was like the height probably of the, indie filmmaking era, I think. And I worked as an assistant director, trainee assistant director, and then 2 years as a second AD on some really great films. I was a second AD on E.T. Oh. I was a trainee assistant director on Airplane. So I worked on a bunch of films, and when I had gotten in enough days, this covered about 3 or 4 years of trainee and second AD, I elected, rather than trying to become a first AD, to go back to film school, make a short film, and come out as a director. And I did that, and the film did really well on the festival circuit, and I got an agent. And I wound up getting hired to do a feature film. My first directing job was something called Stephen King's Silver Bullet. It came out in 1985.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to make features, because at that time, TV was kind of the poor relation. It wasn't really a terribly creative way to direct. Mm-hmm. And after I'd done that film, I got offered more horror films, but that's not my greatest, that's not, I don't really feel temperamentally drawn that much to horror, although I've done some TV shows which touch on it. But I became very choosy and very selective, to the point where I turned down everything that was offered to me, and the things I wanted to do weren't offered to me.
Yeah. So
I wound up getting offered some TV work. And I thought it would be kind of like, okay, well, it'll be good practice until I get that, my next feature. I was forced. I got a lot of work in television. I realized, you don't learn how to be a director by not directing. So I kind of regarded TV as like, okay, this will be training ground. And I worked on a lot of early shows. Beverly Hills 90210 came around, and I did a ton of those. And that's where I really kind of cut my teeth on the whole thing. And then I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I did a lot of directing work, and then kind of the golden age of television started. And I was around for The Sopranos, which started, and I was offered the second episode of The Sopranos. Wow. The pilot was made, like 6 months before they went to series. And because I had done a show called Northern Exposure, which I loved.
I love Northern Exposure.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. That was a great one.
That was one of the great TV shows. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sidetrack you, but I love Northern Exposure, and you also directed Young Riders, is one of my favorite TV shows.
That was a good one too. Yeah, there were a lot of fun shows. I consider certainly Northern Exposure.
It's just one of those great classics.
Oh yeah, it was so much fun and so inventive, and I consider it part of, if we're going to call it golden age of television. I hope that would be included.
Yes,
in it, but it was
thank you.
Really, It's probably, though, a little before people, what people consider that, because I think The Sopranos was probably kind of the start of that thing.
But it was just so ahead of its time in so many ways, including that one.
Smart, funny and indirect, and yeah, it was like nuanced and subtle and sophisticated the way, the great shows are now. And what's unusual about it is it was a network show. It was a network hit, which means it had to have attracted, millions of viewers, which so many of the cable shows don't have to do because they're kind of niche and they kind of don't need that as many viewers to be considered a success. But anyway, that was kind of a long-winded explanation.
No, it's great.
TV. But what was great was that I while I still was interested in I had some development deals and some features, I still was very choosy about it. But TV just, at a certain point, it just hit me like I'm getting better material on these things. It's like it's more fun to direct shows that are this smart and nuanced and intelligent than some, sequel to a sequel to a sequel or some tentpole kind of thing. And you guys probably are well aware that, indie films have kind of fallen, the number of them that get produced. That's temperamentally, I'm kind of drawn to them, the kind of smart character driven.
You're talking to a huge Billy Jack fan. So I totally get it.
Me too. And so anyway, TV just became a place where I just love to work. It also, I love how the turnaround is so much quicker than a feature. You do something and it airs within a few months. Now that's kind of changing with with some of the new outlets and everything. But, people talk about it, millions of people see it, and you move on to something else. That really suits me temperamentally.
That must be pretty interesting, though. I mean, what is that like to go into, there's a TV show and it's kind of up and going, and then how does that work? Because there's different directors, and yet there's such consistency with how these are done. But at the same time, that consistency, there are sometimes like moments of brilliance. I know I've watched far too much television, and there are times that even going back, I'm watching old, Westerns from the 50s and 60s, and I'll go, yes, this is written by so-and-so and directed by so-and-so. I always like theirs,
Yeah.
So how is that whenever you have to kind of just slide into something that's already up and going, like this kind of well-oiled machine, yet trying to make it your own?
Well, you put your finger right on what the challenge is in directing series television. It's so odd because, when you're the director, you're kind of the one in command. And so you're coming into a well-oiled machine and you're there for 2 or 3 weeks and you're the one essentially giving orders, and people are expected to follow you. And it's a weird thing. I mean, you first have to develop trust, and you have to be a credible, you have to take responsibility. But I mean, there's so many different aspects to this question you raised. I mean, the first thing I guess I would want to say is that whenever I get a show, I feel a tremendous responsibility to really acquaint myself with as much of it as I possibly can, its history, watch as many episodes as I can. Because when you enter a show, every show has its own sensibility, its own visual language, its own way of seeing things, its own tone, its own pace. You really need to absorb all that. I mean, I kind of think of it as there's a language to learn, and you have to learn it so that you can then speak it in your own voice. That's kind of one way of thinking about it. If you're just into mimicry, it's going to be kind of generalized hack work. And that happens from time to time. But the really great episodes are done is when a director comes in, really immerses him or herself in all of these different aspects, and then brings themselves to it, and then tells the story. Because as the director, even on a series, even on an episode, the director is, certainly so long as he or she is, on the set directing, is the storyteller, is the only one making those moment-to-moment discriminations and assessments about how the story is getting told and where to direct the audience's attention and how to adjust a performance to keep it on point so that the story is furthered in subtle ways that, a viewer may not even be there's always a million ways you can play any scene or any there's all kinds of realistic ways to play scenes, but unless it's feeding the overall some sort of vision of it's like when you're telling a story to kids around a campfire or whatever else, it's like you have to monitor exactly how, are they with me? Are they following me?
Yeah.
What do I say next? Those are the kind of questions you ask yourself as director. And as far as why it so often seems to work is, on a series, you're not there alone. There's so many consistent elements. Of course, there's the writers and the show creator, and they've worked tirelessly and to make each script conform to the overall vision of the show and the story they're telling. And then there's the same director of photography. Generally, sometimes they'll alternate too, but the look of the show is going to be similar, and the same.
Hopefully the actors, all the series regulars are pretty well versed in their character as well.
Exactly. So there's a lot of elements that are kind of creating the mean, as it were. It's like that are going to be consistent. But if the director doesn't, so it'll always kind of feel like the show. But the ones that really work well, I think, are when supervised by the director, coming in, making sure all the elements really cohere in a really fresh way, so that discoveries are actually made and each moment is compelling. An audience can understand what's happening, but the degree to which they're involved varies from director to director, because it's how compelling you are as a storyteller. But it's not something, if you watch 10 straight episodes of a show, you're still going to feel it's the same show, but some are going to affect you more deeply than others. And that's not all at the hands of the director. I don't mean to suggest that. I mean, clearly some scripts are stronger than others and all that. But that's really what I regard the director's chief function is, to be storyteller. And as far as the actors, that's another really fascinating thing, because, if you come into season 4 of a show, the actors are far more familiar with their characters than you are. However, they may not be up with what the nuances of this particular story or this particular episode is. So you, as the director, have to help them understand what's at issue. What are the stakes of this particular moment? What sort of reaction is going to set up something down the line? It's
collaboration.
It's the most collaborative arts that I can imagine.
And how much time, because it is faster paced, right? So how much time do you normally get to direct in?
For preparation, like familiarizing yourself with the show, and then actually starting to get into the nitty gritty, and then be there. What's the timeline like?
The part you get paid for is very small. Preparation, I try to prepare before I ever start. As far as what the contract says and what happens is, so like for a typical hour of television, it used to be for networks, it would be like 7 days of prep and 8 days to shoot. And nowadays, with some of the higher end shows, the more, especially some of the, with the big effects show, like a Westworld or something, you might shoot 14 days or 15 days even, but that's unusual. But some of the bigger shows I've done, like Homeland or The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel or some other stuff like that, you'll get maybe between 10 and 12 days. That's a very high-end show. Most are like in the 7 to 9 or 8 to 10 day range of shooting. And then before that, you get like 7 days of prep, sometimes 8 days of prep. So it's very, very much more condensed from a feature film. A feature film, you might get 8 weeks of prep and 10 weeks to shoot. And when you think about it, the screen time is just a little...
It's not that different.
It's like double. It's like a 2-hour movie versus a 1-hour show. And and then the other thing is, you often don't get your script until the day before you start prepping.
Wow.
So you might show up with 7 or 8 days to prepare everything, and you're just seeing the script at the start of that. And preparing a show is a lot more complicated than you might think. I mean, some shows are more difficult to prep than others, but you almost always have to find locations. You have to find cast for particular parts. You have to figure out how you're going to shoot it, what special equipment you're going to need, all kinds of things that really get telescoped on a television show compared to a feature film.
I hadn't thought about that. Whenever you have some new cast members, like somebody's just going to be in that one episode, do you have to watch any auditions, or how's that work?
Well, that's a key part of one of the most significant responsibilities of the director is to have an opinion, I'll say, of the casting. It's like the director is not empowered to say, okay, you're going to play this part and you're going to play this part. That's really the power in television really resides with the showrunner, the writers. The head writer is generally the one who has final say on most creative decisions, but the director does, by contract, have to be consulted on all casting questions, and that's as it should be, because the director is the one charged with getting the performance, and the director is the one, again, who has that kind of subliminal sense of how it's all going to work, and has to develop a sense of how he or she will work with that new actor. So casting used to be all, coming into the room and getting to, people would read scene, and then you get to work with them and see how you work with them. In recent years, though, what's happened is that so many auditions are just handled via tape, and some actors will even send in a tape. Okay, here's my audition, and that's far more convenient for everybody. But it's unfortunate in a few significant ways, which is you can't really tell unless you're sitting in a room with someone your real sense of them. You can get a pretty good sense. And then you also sometimes are prevented from working with them because it might just be a tape. Well, it is a tape. And so unless you ask for a callback and ask the casting director, could you give this note to the actor and ask them to try it with this in mind and this other adjustment. And then they might do it again. But you don't have that interactive thing, which is so critical, because that's what happens when you're on the set making it. You want to get a sense of how you relate to the actor and how responsive the actor is to your ideas, and how present they are, how well they listen. And so it's a lot more challenging that way.
Yeah. I mean, you can't get a sense of like their chemistry, among the actors, but also your chemistry with them, just working with them. You can pick someone and go, they did great. And then you get them on set and they don't take adjustments well.
That's a great point. And that's really the main reason I like to audition people in person, because it's true. You just have an energetic sense of what your connection is with this human being. And I mean, what's significant about that to me is I want to know when I'm directing. So I'm always trying to read each person I'm with, because I have to connect to them in a way that I can affect them, that I can move them away from one kind of emotional state into possibly another, or thinking about something a little differently. You have to develop an immediate sense of how can I affect this other human being that I'm just getting to know. Yeah. So part of the challenge and opportunity in directing is to really connect to another soul, another person, and you're really you're hoping you're going to be invited into you're going to be able to develop trust from them, so that you'll be invited into their process, and that they'll be able to hear you. People, react to different cues differently, and you can only really develop what those might be when you're literally relating to them.
Yeah, that's true. There has to be such a level of trust between the director and the actor too. The second the actor feels, attacked or something like that, I mean, they're just emotionally shut down, and you're just not going to be able to get a good performance.
Yeah, working with actors, I think, is really the most important responsibility of a director. I mean, clearly the visuals are terribly important, and there's all kinds of ways you communicate. But my feeling always is if the actors aren't caring, aren't really understanding what's at stake, aren't really making real the emotional life that the character is supposed to have, then the story falls flat, no matter how brilliant the visuals or anything else are. And it's such a that's why I love the fact that I had 3 years of acting experience, because it's like, and that's what I tell young directors and any aspiring directors out there. I would say this to as well, that it's a great idea to take an acting workshop yourself, not just how to direct actors, but how to act, because only until you really face the challenge of inhabiting another character with a whole different life experience and a entirely different imaginary circumstances, their lives, until you face that challenge of actually having to embody that and what it takes, then you don't really understand what would be helpful from a director to hear. It's not just like, cry then, just cry then.
Yeah.
Just do that. It's like, yeah, I mean, even experienced actors, develop techniques where they might be able to give you that, but it's not as good as if they really accessed
if they really feel it.
Yeah. Reality that leads to that. You don't want it to just be a technical performance. And so, you really, actors, I have such empathy for actors and such love really for them. It's not, not all actors are the same. And there are a lot of cliches about actors. A lot of directors who haven't had experience with actors are terrified of them because they think of them as, whatever. They run the gamut. And a lot of people, a lot of people are dismissive of actors as being narcissistic or whatever. And it's like that to me so misses the mark. I mean, anybody can be narcissistic. You don't have to be an actor to be narcissistic.
Exactly.
But it's a noble profession in that we're really asking them to carry emotions that most of us would rather not feel.
Yeah.
That's really what, I think people tune in or go to the theater or, to watch. They want to see people in extreme situations, what it would be like to go through something, either or to feel something vicariously that you'd like to experience. But the bottom line is, unless it's truthful, it's not going to be meaningful for an audience. So the actor has to just be able to be a chameleon but really commit to all kinds of different outside of their comfort zone. I mean, that's what
if the emotion isn't really there, then the audience isn't going to have that cathartic release.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we all sense it. When you see something that's not real. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that's the big question. The big thing I'm always going for is does it feel real? Is what I'm watching something that feels truly alive? And is it of interest to me? Is there a compelling enough conflict going on, drama going on, dramatic question at issue? And if any of those things aren't credible, then you've lost it.
Well, and you have this great book, Directing Great Television. What prompted you to write this book? I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I started along the way in my directing, and young directors have asked to shadow me, be with me while I prep and shoot because they wanted to learn. And I've done that with a lot of them. But there were at a certain point, it became there were like 3 or 4 in particular that were really sharp to me. I thought they were really great. And they'd all made short films that I really liked. So I saw they had talent. They all were of a certain age, just approaching 30. So I knew they were serious. They'd been at this for a while. They all really wanted to break in. And I thought, there's something that film school doesn't teach you. And that it's like you're kind of just thrown into the deep end when you finally get hired, certainly for an episode of television. And you don't learn certain things. And I'd like to fill that gap. I'd like to kind of share my knowledge with you. So I started a little mentoring group, and we would do things like I'd come up with exercises. Like I remember I was directing the show House, and on the weekend I asked the producer, "Do you mind if I bring some young people onto the set?" And we got on the weekend by ourselves, and I said, "Okay, guys, here's the script I'm shooting. Imagine this is tomorrow you're going to have to come in and have a rehearsal and show everybody." Work with the actors, have a staging in mind. You don't want to impose it. You want a rehearsal to kind of lead to it, but you need to have a staging in mind and how you're going to shoot it in mind so that you can get this rehearsal accomplished quickly. So take a scene and just figure out what you're going to, how you would stage it without the actors being there. Just imagine, pick a scene and go, and then you can come and show me what you came up with, and I'll ask you questions. It's like, they might have taken a 2-page scene and they said, "Oh yeah, I figured something out." I said, "Okay, how many shots do you need for it?" They say 17. I said, "Well, you're not going to have time for 17, so let's figure out, so things that you don't learn in film school." And I started deconstructing my process because a lot of it was just instinctive with me, and I developed it over the years. And I realized, I'd like to reach more people than just the ones that actually come into my sphere of acquaintances and that I have time to help personally. So I wanted to write this book to kind of share some of the things you need to think about to direct effectively, and what directing really is. How it is storytelling, how every decision you make has to be influenced by story. And not only that, what's most important is how you connect and how you can really care about the story you're telling. Because my feeling always is if I
if I don't care about something, I can't make someone else care about it.
Right.
If I'm just directing an episode because, too many directors, say they think if you say the lines and all that you've told the story. That's just the beginning. The script is just kind of really just a skeleton. It's kind of a fleshless blueprint. I mean, there's a lot of thought to it, a lot implicit in it, but you have to realize it. You have to give that story meaning, and you have to hold the vision of what's operating at the deeper levels, why this is an important story to tell. These are the kind of things I like to address, and I wanted to share with people too how some of the shows that they've likely seen. I wanted to share my experience and how a particular scene evolved into what it became. Because it's not written that way. There's no such thing as filming the script. That would be photographing words on a page. That's not a scene. You have to flesh it out. You have to,
you have to translate it into a visual medium. Yeah.
Yeah. Make it come alive, because it's not alive when it's just words on a page. It has to become embodied. It has to become staged and all of that kind of stuff. So I share stories about certain creative problems I faced, and I try to do it not speaking from on high, but just trying to bring the audience with me. Like, hey, this was the challenge I faced here, and I go through several chapters where each one devoted to a different problem on one show in particular. And that's one thing. And I talk about getting the performance and my approach to working with actors and how I think you can be effective there. And another one I call the language of camera, and how everything serves story. And so I'm hoping it's going to be useful not just to aspiring directors or writers, but also just to fans of television, because you see the finished product, and it's sometimes unclear it's probably always unclear how that thing came about. That it was a series of choices made at each stage by many, many people, but supervised by the director, and all in service of telling a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you also have a chapter on working with showrunners.
Yes.
I think it's a really interesting topic because it's very unique.
Yeah, you don't have that in a movie.
Yeah. That's probably one of the most significant differences between directing a feature and directing an episode of television. And it's funny because I say I think I start out that chapter maybe, or one of the chapters, but it's like directing an episode of television is sometimes feeling like you're doing the best job you can on somebody else's show. Because it's like it's the showrunner who the showrunners are kind of the stars of television, and that's understandable. It's generally their vision that brought the thing into existence, and they are supervising the arc of the whole season in each individual episode. So it's interesting. Everybody kind of understands you're serving the vision of the showrunner, as opposed to a feature film. And also different from a feature film where the director might be working in concert with a writer and developing the material. In television, the writers and the showrunners really they're not developing it with you. They're giving you the developed script. So it's then your job to run with it. But there's so many ways you can still enhance that and further that vision. It just can't be done independent of the writers. You can't take the story in a new direction without getting their permission, without maybe you'll show them something that they really like. But you do have to still serve the vision of the showrunner. So that's kind of a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Interesting how streaming is, mixing up the models, right? It's mixing it up a little bit. You also don't have, the feedback while the season's going to ever pivot in any new direction, because it's sometimes, I guess that's not always the case.
There's a real difference too. I've noticed, like when I tried binging a show that was created in the world of dropping it all at once and binging versus binging a show that was released weekly. And I don't know, there's a different flow to it, but also I remember there are some shows that was part of the fun and the excitement was everybody watched it 1 week at a time and you talked about it and you threw out theories and you argued about it and da-da-da-da. And that was a lot of the fun. But now that but if you go back and just try to binge it, you're like, it's not as much fun as I remember it being.
Wait, let me understand. So you're saying the shows that were released weekly, when you binge it, they don't flow as well? Is that what you're
Sometimes
saying?
they don't. Yeah. So, I mean, some
Yeah.
of them, of course, do.
But that makes a lot of sense. And,
It was a pre-binge world.
Yeah, well, there's good and there's pro and there's con, I think, to that. I mean, first of all, I really miss that too, because like when I would direct The Sopranos or 6 Feet Under or some of the great shows that were then aired weekly, it was so much fun because, it'd be a water cooler show. They used to call it that, every week. Oh, did you see it last night? And it was a big event, and it was fun to have been a part of it, and it was fun. I enjoyed being a fan of shows like that I could wait for the next week. I mean, you still have to in some of the shows.
Yeah.
And then this other thing happened, but you're so right, because the shows evolve over time. People make mid-course corrections, and they respond. It's funny. Like one of my first episodic jobs, actually, where I really cut my teeth, was doing Beverly Hills 90210.
I do that, the original. Yeah, I grew up watching that. Yeah,
and so it's so funny because it's like, they started that show. I don't know if your audience is familiar with it or not, but it was like this family from Minnesota comes to Beverly Hills, and it's like, so they cast. They had the cast, and then and at the time you may recall, Shannon Doherty was the girl from Minnesota, and Jenny Garth was the spoiled Beverly Hills girl.
Uh-huh.
Well, their basic characters did not fit that. I mean, the actors were not really necessarily suited for that. Shannon had her strengths, Jenny had her strengths, but they weren't really the types that they were written for. So as the show was evolving, they rewrite it, so the roles became almost totally reversed.
Yeah.
It's like they make and then the fans chime in. They know some, or even like on Homeland, I can think of this example. Damian Lewis's character in Homeland, the first season, for those of you who don't know the show, he is a U.S. Marine who's held in captivity, and it turns out he's going to be a suicide bomber for Al Qaeda. And so the story kind of would dictate he should not be around after the first season, after he, wears a bomb and straps it onto himself. And, he's not, but such chemistry existed between, Claire Danes and Damian Lewis. The fans loved them together. So Showtime said, no, let's keep them together. So they kept Damian around for like 3 seasons, defying all possible, plausibility. So, it's like things change and shift. Whereas, and so I can see, so I can see how going back and looking at shows made in that way, there would be more of a disjointed feeling because there was room to shift. The other thing, though, that's on the downside of making it all at once is that you don't get any feedback, and you also the writers don't even get the feedback of what they have, who the actors are, because you're not going to see a cut of a show, really a final cut for something, until maybe the 3rd or 4th episode is filming before you see the first one. Mm-hmm. And the ship has sailed. It's like, you may see after the first episode, it might be very clear there's no chemistry between two characters that are supposed to dominate have this big love relationship. And when they finally see the final cut for the first episode, they've already committed, 3 other episodes have been filmed. They're in various forms of being finished. And so anyway, so you don't get opportunities to mid-course correct nearly as easily.
Yeah, we were just talking about, some of the last good water cooler TV shows. And like, I know somebody who only just recently watched Lost, and they're like, yeah, but it's not, I didn't quite love it. Like I remember everybody being so gaga and crazy over it. I'm like, well, yeah, but I mean, it built every week over the course of a few years, and everybody was making themselves nuts trying to figure it out. You guys watched it in 2 weeks, I mean, it's
right.
Can't make any fan theories or anything like that.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like a participatory event, I mean, without audience participation, sometimes it's not as much fun.
And in Lost, which I also was fortunate to direct, it's like, there was definitely responsiveness from the writers to what they saw the fans were interested in. Mm-hmm. And then they'd write an episode about that. Like I did in the first season, the first backstory for Hurley, the character Hurley.
Yeah, I loved Hurley.
Like the 17th episode or something. They'd done backstories for everybody, and they hadn't done Hurley, but Hurley just captivated everybody. I was, Jorge Garcia is so great,
Everybody loved Hurley. He was like everybody's favorite.
The episode on the last season I directed was called Everybody Loves Hugo.
Yeah.
That was his name before. Yeah. So it's funny. And, one other thing I just wanted to say, too, that I've heard writers lament is, the whole thing about making pilots was always and continues to be, but it was always kind of this, it seems like so wasteful because they, networks would commission 100 pilots, and maybe 5 of them would go to series. Well, they might spend, they would definitely spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on all these different pilots, and they'd go out and get made, and then they say, well, are any of them any good? Okay, well, we like these amounts, so we'll take these to series. And the financial remedy to that was at some point they said, well, we're not going to do that. We're just going to say this show by J.J. Abrams, they'll get a good pedigree, they'll get good people, and they'll say, okay, we're just going to go straight to series. So a pilot will just be episode 1, and we're committed to making, 22 episodes or 12 episodes. And the problem with that is you don't get to, again, you don't have any mid-course corrections. Like when you do a pilot, you'd make the pilot and you'd shut down for months until it was finished, till everybody figured out if it's going to go. But often producers would look at the pilot and say, well, this actor isn't very good. We should recast this character.
Yeah.
Or we should make this change. Or we should reshoot four of these scenes, add a little subplot about this. That's all gone now because they have to, the ship starts to sail right away.
Like I remember I was telling Marx, I was like, quick trivia. Everybody thinks there's 2 Quentins on Grace Under Fire. There's 3. There was a different little boy for the pilot. A little blonde-haired kid with glasses, Exactly. And it had a very different feel to it. And I was just I saw the pilot of The Nanny. The whole house is flipped. The front door's on the other side of the place, and the stairs are on the other side of the house. The whole set's different.
You know why that's probably the case? Is because when they make a pilot, they don't know if it's going to series, so they'll look for a real location. So you'll go out and they'll say, okay, let's find a house. And they'll take that house and they'll shoot the pilot, and they say, if it goes to series, we're going to build the location.
Yeah, build a set.
And then when it goes to series, they think, well, that was really awkward having that window there by the wall, or there's no windows on the wall. We need light coming in. So they'll redesign it, and subtly they'll try to, but that's probably why that happened.
Yeah, and nowadays the pilot's episode, the first episode just sort of seamlessly goes in, but it used to be the pilot was just at times, sometimes even tonally quite different.
Oh, that's so true. If you look at some of the classic shows and you look at the pilot and you think, wow, this has nothing to do with what I like about the show.
Yeah, it's like, how did they get that out of that?
Yeah, but the audience forgot about it because it's, they started to get interested like in episode 2 or 3 or 4.
Right.
If the show didn't get canceled before.
Yeah. I feel like,
I remember,
might be wrong, but I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I think they recast someone and reshot the pilot. Or at least
I think so. Oh, well, and like if you've ever watched the beginning of Gunsmoke, like I'm talking early first season.
James Arnett's Gunsmoke?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was so cool is they didn't know that Clint Eastwood was going to do that intro at the begining. And it aired and the whole cast was at somebody's house watching it. They started screaming, "Oh my God." He did a whole intro going, I got my good friend here, James Arness, is going to bring you this show, and it's gritty and it's raw, and I think you're going to like it. It gets my seal of approval kind of thing, which was really cool.
He was Rowdy. Yeah, he was Rowdy Yates on his show. What was the name of his show?
No, this was this was John Wayne that did this.
Oh, John Wayne. Oh,
yeah,
okay,
I'm sorry. Yeah. This is John Wayne. And he was like, and this is my buddy, James Arness. And they were so excited. But even beyond that, Miss Kitty, Miss Kitty is this sort of like, I'm a worldly woman and nothing's going to surprise me and da-da-da-da. Well, I cracked up this one time because she's in the saloon, the Long Branch, and in walks Matt, and she just waves and is like, hi, Matt. Like, she's like, this little girl's got a crush on him. which is not Miss Kitty, right? Like
Right.
nobody thinks of Miss Kitty this way.
Yeah.
And
What happens a lot is it's like they cast people and then they don't know what they've got and they see, oh my God, Miss Kitty would be great as this other way that she then became.
Oh, and Doc, he's always like real gruff and curmudgeon-y, but he was like almost mean in the pilot. Like he wasn't likable curmudgeon-y. He was just like mean. And that was because of the radio.
Actor not having found his stride. It's like he played probably a cliche at the first. Okay, these lines read a certain way. I'll just go with that.
Yeah.
And then he made it more real. Yeah, I saw all kinds of things.
And I think they were trying to make it so much like the radio show. The radio show, the Doc was like this weird, crazy, maniacal guy who liked cutting on bodies. Like it was really bizarre.
He became a teddy bear. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to misspeak. It was John Wayne did the intro, the Duke.
Yeah. And I forgot the title of Clint Eastwood's show was Rawhide.
Rawhide, he played Rowdy Yates.
Guy named Rowdy Yates. That was how he started, and then
that was his first.
Yeah. And Sergio Leone then brought him over to Spain to make all the spaghetti westerns, and that was his.
Yeah, he didn't start getting big until after he left the country.
Right.
Which is so wild.
Talking about water cooler shows, one show that we liked that was definitely a water cooler show when it was out was Alias.
Yes. That's the one we were talking about. We were like, that was one of the last that we could remember, like kind of one of the last of the water cooler shows.
Except for Game of Thrones, of course.
Yeah. I don't count Game of Thrones. I don't like that one.
That was so much fun. I'll tell you one story about that. It was, that was my first introduction to J.J. Abrams, who's just so creative and inventive. And I don't know which episode it was I did the first season. It was maybe the 6th episode or something like that. And do you remember too? Bradley Cooper was in that. He got his. Yeah. And, but, the plot was so complicated and interesting and like, oh my God, what's going on? And I remember like on the 6th episode or something, I happened to hear from JJ what was going to be the climax of the season. And that in those days, it was like 24 episodes or 22 episodes. And it was like, oh, in the end of the season, Cindy Bristow is going to find out that, her mother's alive or something like that. I mean, I forget what it was. And I said, oh my God, that's going to be so great. And he says, yeah, I think it's really going to be great. And then the script comes out for the next episode, and I saw they had moved it up to the next episode. It wasn't going to wait 24 episodes.
Oh my gosh.
He had an idea. He just said, oh, let's make that happen. And it's like and he did the same thing with Lost. It's like, he is so bold and trusting. He loves the challenge of having to figure things out with a deadline. And it's like, I was thinking, where do you go from there? If you reveal the end of the season, like if you're pulling that up to episode 7 or 8, you got to think of all this more plot to go from 8 to 22. Yeah. But he loved that challenge. I mean, the image I always had of JJ was he'd always be sawing off the branch he was sitting on. He'd be sitting on the tree, sawing it off. And it's like, he'll trust that before the branch hits the ground, he'll figure out something else. And and the same thing on Lost. He directed the pilot of Lost. And he's been documented as saying, we didn't know what any of this stuff meant. We just threw in, a snowman or what was it, the white bear? It's like, we'll just throw in anything. And they didn't feel any obligation or need to figure it all out because they loved just the adventurous challenge of just figuring it out retroactively. And at the end of the day, I think, they may have paid a price because the last episode, I'm not sure it was fully satisfying because it's like, how do you tie together all these strings when you've just been willing to go anywhere,
Right.
So.
It's true. I know we were talking a little bit, I think, before we started recording about challenges in filming, some of the stuff we faced with Indy and such, and ticks came up and chiggers.
Yeah. We filmed one time. We started out with a snowstorm. At one point during filming, we had a dust storm. We had thunderstorm with tornadoes. We ended up in a massive tick nest. Marx ended up getting a staph infection from the tick bites.
Oh God, could you keep filming during any of
We
that?
kept filming during all of it.
course.
Yeah, you have to on an indie, right?
I
You don't have
mean,
to
we
come
filmed
back.
during every little bit of it. And I mean, what else happened? It was snow, storms, tornadoes, dust storm, ticks. I mean,
Man, it was
Sounds
fun.
biblical.
we finally were like, if a plague happens, it's our fault. Thankfully this was years
And
before
what was the weather? What was the weather that was supposed to be in the story?
consistent.
I like that answer.
We were hoping for consistent.
It's supposed to be warm. It was not supposed to be
Well,
no
and then
dust storms.
and then like at one point the heat index was over 100, and I know I went
just
down
to
like a
clarify,
sack of
this was one project, but it was spread out over a few weekends. So
bricks. Yeah, a few weekends, but unfortunately, where we live, a
was-
few weekends it can go from snow to 100-some degrees.
it didn't happen
Hey,
all in the same
I'll tell
week.
you an Alias story because
Uh-huh.
I remember there was one episode of Alias I did that involved a hostage exchange in the Mexican desert, and so we're in Los Angeles, and so we went up to a place called, I think it's called Mono Lake, but it's where they film all those car commercials where you see the parched earth.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like cracks in these cars are going. It's like a barren floor, and then there's mountains ringing it in the distance, and they do these spin outs of cars all the time and everything. So we went up to that place, and it was 121.
Oh.
And we had a whole crew there, and we had tents and everything else. But yeah, weather, that's something people don't probably appreciate, how difficult production can be.
And
Because,
trying to make your actors look like they're not melting is
Oh my
such a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's no way the makeup just starts to fall.
right. I mean, there's great comedy in a lot of that too, and especially when you watch low budget shows and they just had to soldier on, and you just, but if the story's good enough, people will buy it. That's the other thing that's really interesting is people we all crave stories. We're narrative creatures. We need stories. We want stories. And, sometimes it's helpful to remember that, you can get away with a lot because an audience wants to believe the story.
Yeah.
They want, you really see that on stage. When you think about what a stage play is, it's like there's this constant communication with the audience. Like, are you still with me? I know this is ridiculous. I'm saying I'm in a castle in France and you're just looking at this black backdrop and I'm here, but I'm going to pretend it's there. You buying this? And there's this kind of unspoken, yeah, I'm with you. Good. I'm imagining that, and to some degree, film has a different expectation for realism, but still we are narrative creatures. We love stories. We want to the audience participates in it in a much greater extent than is generally recognized, and that's how you can get away with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you have some series they're more special effects or fight choreography heavy, like
Sure.
you've done Buffy, Boys, Alias, some True Blood.
Homeland. Some of the biggest stuff I did was in Homeland. I did an episode called 13 Hours in Islamabad, the taking of the Pakistani embassy by terrorists.
Oh, wow.
That was like really heavy action. But yeah. It's a real interesting challenge.
Well, for example, in that example, like how much prep work did you have to do?
Oh, tremendous. It's like, well, you have to, because, the thing is, I'll tell you a little trade secret. Nobody really gets hurt in any of these things.
If you're doing it right.
And every explosion is actually really carefully planned.
Oh, yeah.
So nobody's going to get hurt. So like in that episode of Homeland, it was nonstop action, but one sequence in particular is coming to mind since you asked it, is like there were these hostages and they penetrate into the embassy and there's these marble floors and floor to ceiling windows. And this terrorist has all these employees lined up and he's executing them one in a row, one by one until, Rupert Friend, the actor, comes in and there's a massive shootout with machine guns and everything else. So, as I was prepping this thing, I realized, okay, you can do bullet hits and all that, but these windows have to shatter. They're floor to ceiling windows. It's like how many rounds of ammunition can be fired in this one hallway most of these windows getting blown out, and we couldn't afford to blow out all of them. So we had to really pick out. I mean, it was a big prep thing. First of all, I had to kind of stage it in my mind. But this is before you get the actors on and say, what do you feel like doing? Television, and in features, you really need to have a staging in mind, and the staging has to be intelligent so that the actors are assisted in their performance by how they're being asked to move, because the movement leads to feeling. And the staging, one rule of staging I always liked or hint about it is if you should try to stage it so that if you turn down the sound and you just watched the behavior, you'd still know what the scene's about. And so you try to do things that will facilitate that, and it also helps the actors reach those emotions, because what you do physically actually does affect your emotional state as well. So I had to figure all that stuff out, and how this person has to get killed at this point in the action, and this has to happen. And then we picked out, okay, this like 4 or 5 huge floor to ceiling window panes had to be shattered. And that's something that has to be rigged, just because it's another clue. They don't really firing a bullet into it. And so we had to work all that out. And then and then it has to be budgeted how much for, we need at least 3 takes. We had 3 shots at it. And then what's the downtime for replacing that whole pane of glass for take 2? All those kind of things. It's really an interesting puzzle.
I'm kind of wondering how different it is staging and directing something like that's very intense but more reality-based action and fighting versus the kind of fighting and action you'd have in, say, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. or Lois and Clark,
Right, or Heroes, or things where they're supernatural. Yeah, so or The Boys. Yeah, it's like, so in those kind of things, you often do a lot of wire work, so that there's flying bodies. It's like someone might get ratcheted, like have a rig on their torso that's covered by their wardrobe. So when they get hit by a super power person, they get flung back, 40 feet against a wall, so that's like, okay, we're going to, rig a pulley, and then you digitally erase the wire behind them. So it's like, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's a big, any kind of fight is an interesting challenge. But when you get into the realm of Buffy or Heroes or The Boys or the Marvel universe, you have to do things that aren't physically possible to do, because that's what makes them superheroes, that they can do physically possible to do. So there's all kinds of tricks and all that. But even on things that, as we're calling reality-based, there are a lot of difficult things. There's a show called Snowfall, which is about bringing crack cocaine into South Central Los Angeles, set in the 80s. John Singleton was the last thing he developed before he sadly passed away. But I had a sequence I did the first episode of season 3, and one of the gags on that was a cop watches a drug buy happen with a stopped car in the middle of the street, and he approaches, and this junkie is trying to buy this young woman who's really strung out on crack, is trying to buy some crack. The junkie, the dealer, sees the cop and tears off in the car with the junkie halfway in the car, like she's reaching in. So her lower torso is out the window as this car is like flying by down the street. Well, that took a lot of that, how do we do that? We had, lengthy conversations with the stunt coordinator, and how we're going to film it, and to anchor her in some way, put a platform for when we're inside the car, have a platform below her, so that and then she has to fly off the car and roll into a stop. Things that, it's an exciting stunt because it's life-threatening.
Right.
But you can't shoot something in a way that's life-threatening. So it just takes there are a lot of smart people, and there's so much talent in working films. At every level. There's a lot of competition for these jobs, I know, and the people who succeed at them really, really have reached a level of expertise and competence that's really impressive.
I gotta ask, just because my own personal, how much I love all the genre shows, but I also do love Westerns. Said that you had directed some young writers and Dr. Quinn.
Dr.
Quinn, Medicine Woman. What was there anything different that you approach as a director for something set
For
in a different
Westerns?
time period in Westerns? Yeah, is there just anything?
First of all, just generally, I have to approach every show as its own unique thing. So every show is different in that they all have their own sensibility. Like I just did a show, Penny Dreadful City of Angels. Did you guys see it?
Yes, that was so good.
I thought it was really great. I was so sad it didn't make it, but it was, set in 1938 Los Angeles.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah, I thought so too. And it was very heightened. So even the acting, I've written this book, as you've mentioned, and I reference a lot of shows in it. And so I'm putting together clips to show when I talk about the book. And I've done talks anyway before the book about my process and all that. And I bring these clips along. And I was watching clips from a lot of other shows, that are much more realistic. And the acting is very realistic and recognize it. And I put in something from Penny Dreadful, and it's so heightened. It's just so different. It's like melodramatic,
Right.
but it works because that was kind of the feeling for the show.
The whole thing's so stylized. Yeah.
Yeah. And Westerns have their own style too. I've done several. I did Deadwood also. I don't know if that was one you watched, but I'm trying to think of the last Western I did. Probably, I don't recall, but there's just you can't have, the language is different. It's the pace is different. It's like you're entering another time. Like nowadays, we're in such a ADD culture and everything. Everything is just fast.
Yeah.
Fast. That you wouldn't do that in a Western. And it's like, and I love that. I love silences. I love pregnant moments. We miss those so much sometimes in the shows now that are, representing what it's like in present day.
I remember them talking about in Young Writers, someone saying about, they wanted it kind of dirty and gritty. They're like, well, we get the clothes and then we kind of throw it on the ground and then we step on it and we get a bunch of dirt on it and then we have a horse run across it a couple of times and then it's almost good enough to wear. But I loved on that Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. Yeah. Talking about the heightened in the style.
And then that one actress, I can't remember her name now, that played like multiple parts.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on her name too. British actress. She's brilliant.
Yeah.
She was, yeah.
Oh, but I was thinking of the music and the dancing and everything that was on that was just incredible.
Oh my God. I did the second to last episode, which was the big thing when everybody meets at the dance hall.
The sing. That was my favorite one.
Yeah. That was the most fun and challenging about, and there were like 100 paid dancers. All that dance was rehearsed for 2 weeks in advance, so that scenes when they come in and we had a techno crane going out over the whole dance floor and circling back and all these incredible moves and everything.
Oh, you've
else.
got to tell us everything about filming this, because that was, honest to God, I have the music running in my head right now, and it was
Julie,
my absolute favorite episode.
I can't tell you how happy I am that you even knew the title of the episode and everything. Yeah, I was visually, that was one of the most exciting things I ever did, I think. It was really, really a fun opportunity. And I don't know. I'll tell you anything you want to know.
You started with how 2 weeks. I was wondering, how did you, because they all meet there at the dance club, and this is where it all starts to go down,
Well, it was such a great, it was such a great episode, because what it did was, the whole season was tracking kind of this Chicano family with, I think it's 4 children, and they're all distinct. And one, of course, is a cop, and he's the only Chicano cop in the LAPD in 1938, and he's having to suck it up, all the prejudice within the department. But he's regarded as a traitor by his younger brother, who's a Pachuco, and then another brother who's a labor organizer, and then a sister who's kind of a free spirit, and then she discovers spirituality through this television evangelist.
Yeah.
So and then the mother, who's the housekeeper, who's kept everybody together.
She's trying to keep them all together, and they're all just Oh.
Right. And at this point in the story, the tensions have really been driven mainly by the supernatural character. Why can't we remember her name? She's such a great actress. Somebody should look it up on IMDb.
The chameleon chick in this, where she's everybody's, like, she's just tempting everybody with what, she just keeps a chameleon in each of their lives, which whatever she needs to do to tempt each one. Natalie Dormer.
Natalie Dormer, right. And well, that's even interesting because it's like humanity is just considered like it is like biblical. It's like Natalie Dormer has a sister god. There's two gods kind of competing for the soul of man. Like, what is man? It's kind of like Lucifer, and it's like what are men capable of, and what is humanity capable of? And one has an optimistic view, one has a pessimistic view, and Natalie Dormer has the pessimistic view, and she's going to prove to her sister that human beings are not capable of noble activity.
It kind of reminds me of the Book of Job, where they have very much. The up in the heavens, and it's God and the adversary, and basically the Book of Job is a bet. Yahweh and the adversary are betting, if we do this, what's going to happen
in this story. Right. So in this episode, it's like things are really threatening to blow apart. And at the end of the episode, it seems like they've come together until the lynching happens of the young Latino activist, Chicano activist, and they're dancing, thinking they've all come together finally as a family. And at the end, it's the next episode, it's all going to blow apart when the news comes out. Yeah. But that was one of the most challenging shows I've ever directed, because there was like 15 pages of the family kind of in this dance hall, sitting around a tiny table with 8 characters sitting around the table.
It was a lot.
Talking, all these conflicts getting addressed and resolved, and threatening to blow up, all these tense moments. Meanwhile, 100 people are dancing around it. And then it ends with a huge ensemble dance of the family coming together, which you want to keep exciting. So it was really fun. It was really fun.
I can't believe you directed my favorite episode. That is so awesome. I should have known that before, but I didn't get a chance to look and see which one you did.
You made my day. That was fantastic. And
you made mine.
The show didn't get picked up. And I think I don't know. If the pandemic hadn't happened, who knows, it might have been picked up. But it was a very expensive show. And
and the ending of it just gets you right in the heart too. When you realize the plans that's happening. It's like, why all this happened, and then like this is what's happening to our home. And
what's amazing too is it was all, apart from the supernatural element, it's all based in historical fact. I mean, the American Nazi Party was actually quite big in the mid 30s. Yeah. And so that was those are characters in the story. And the the building of the freeways were a case of social engineering, trying to isolate the poor communities and all these things. It was really, really an interesting study.
Yeah, it was really a very meaningful show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it should have gotten second season.
Yeah, it should. But I tell you what, even just one season, it's a great work of art, and the way it ended was just, anyone who watches it, it's just going to be, it stays with you.
Yeah, good. Evidently, that's great.
Sorry, I get excited.
What are you guys doing? Are you developing another independent film to make, or what?
Not right this second. I am
novels, actually. Yeah,
I'm working on novels right now. Got a novel coming out very soon, first in a series, and then I'm putting together an anthology with 20 other authors, and we're doing that too this year. I'm also, of course, I got to blend the two, right? So I'm working on a TV pilot based on the series and stuff too. So
Marx and I are doing some co-writing on the anthology, and some plans to do some co-writing for some novels in the future. And right now I'm more of a beta reader / editor.
Editor, but yeah. I do have a horror short film that I co-produced and did sound for that.
Oh yeah.
It's been in post-production for a little while.
I forgot about that.
I started out, my first professional job was Silver Bullet, and that was a horror film. I don't know if you happened to see that, but that was Stephen King.
Yeah.
That was
Werewolf.
That was kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Now I gotta go.
Was that released in theaters, or was that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Big time.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah. was a Paramount movie, and it did decently well. Yeah, so that was.
I gotta check that one out.
Well, I was probably too young to really supposed to be watching it, so I probably watched television.
I can promise you, I was not allowed to watch that. I'm just saying.
My mom's
Julie, I think it holds up pretty well. I mean, at the time I made it, I was thinking, oh God, it doesn't work because it was a Stephen King movie, and I read the script. He was great, by the way. Stephen King was great, but Dino De Laurentiis really wanted it to be a hard R, like you associate with Stephen King. But the script was this great kid's adventure. This boy in a wheelchair, and he had this really fun uncle played by Gary Busey, who at the time was very coherent and a brilliant actor. And, and I just wanted it to be. I wanted to make it like as a PG-13 because I just thought it could be a great kid's adventure, which I did. But then the Dino kept saying, no, you got to have these gratuitous, really violent scenes. So it is a weird melange of, some really brutal stuff and this kid's adventure. So it's a little weird. I was, but even now I think it's kind of fun.
Well, I just cover my eyes during the really brutal stuff, and then Marx tells me when I can open them again.
Well, so the brutal stuff is just kind of stylized, and the worst part about the brutal stuff I thought was that it always was just these two-dimensional characters getting offed. It was kind of you're not really very at all. So, but it was fun to do.
Yeah, I'll have to find it.
Yeah, we got to watch that.
I'm sure it's streaming somewhere. Let's see where I can find that at.
I've liked a few. I'm not like a huge Stephen King fan, but I've liked a few. Like I liked the original It miniseries. I watched a few minutes of the new movie, and I'm out. Nope.
Too creepy for her.
Yeah.
It was gross. It was too gross.
Some of his best stuff I don't think is his horror. I mean, it's like Shawshank Redemption and what was the one, about the four boys on the railroad.
Stand By Me.
Stand By Me, yeah. I also worked on, there was a lot of new TV series of his, but Castle Rock I worked on. That was one that came.
Oh, yeah, we watched that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, he's just so prolific. It's amazing.
That's crazy. Yeah,
I wonder if he sleeps.
I don't know.
Never.
Although you've got quite a resume, I'm wondering if you sleep too, to be perfectly honest.
I sleep plenty.
Especially considering how much prep time it takes to get something out.
Yeah, it's fast. It's really fast. Yeah.
You have any other TV projects coming up that you're directing that you can?
Well, I've been working this season on Billions. It's a Showtime show, and I'm doing.
I'm not familiar with that one.
It's hedge fund guys, and big cast, Damian Lewis and Paul Giamatti, and some other. But it's very far from fantasy and that kind of stuff. And science fiction.
I don't know. Getting billions of dollars.
I don't know. That sounds pretty far fetched to me.
And then I'm gonna spend some time trying to promote this book.
Awesome.
Yeah,
it's a good book. I appreciate any book that's got a lot of stories in it. I think that's the best way to learn how to actually do it.
Yeah, I can.
Or
when he gets a book like this, I can tell if it's a really good book because if he either skims it and reads it, or in this case, he's like consuming it. I'm like, okay, that must be a good one.
Well, it goes again to that thing about we're creatures of story. We love stories, and I love stories, and that's really all I wanted to write was to illustrate things by telling stories about it. Not this is the story of what happened here, as opposed to just giving a list of what you do to direct. Because really all it is, any creative thing, you really just have to get to know yourself, consult yourself. I mean, to me, I guess one through line for the book for me is it's like the fundamental director question when you're directing is, how does this make me feel? Whenever I'm watching anything, how do I feel about that? It's like you just constantly have to consult your own instinctive response to whatever it is, an actor's performance or a camera angle that's proposed. It's like you're your own barometer, and it's not just a mental exercise. It's, you have to really be willing to really experience your own feelings, and that informs you of where you want to go. Awesome. And the stories, I think, help with that.
See, that acting paid off.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. No, It was great. In fact, it's funny. Somebody was talking to me about it. He says, I look at your resume and it doesn't look like a director's. It's so varied. It looks like an actor's resume. That's very true, because I really like going into new worlds and new sensibilities so that I can then immerse myself in it so that I can make it mine. And then I've grown from that. It's like I really love the challenge of widening my own way of deepening my own sensibility and understanding something I didn't understand before. And that's true. That kind of is a hallmark for why I'm not one of those guys who feels like I have to be the auteur. I have to just kind of create everything. I'm really drawn to something that compels me. And wow, that's a great show. I'd like to, like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I don't know if you guys watched that one, but it's so stylized and fun.
It's one we've been meaning to check out. We haven't gotten a chance to yet.
I just want to I want to get in there and see, because I know to direct it, I have to really make it mine. And it's like, so that's kind of the fun of doing different things. That's why I like to do comedy and drama and all that. It's like, it's all enriching to me. It's me. Yeah.
Like True Blood, that was a pretty wild one too.
Oh yeah, that was very wild. I had worked on, Alan Ball, who created 6 Feet Under, which was one of my favorite shows ever. And then he created this thing, which is based on a series of novels. You guys probably.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was wild. That was a lot of fun.
I still remember the craziness with I can't remember which season it was, with the Maynard. It was like, I can't believe this is happening. This is just so crazy. Like, I can't believe this is all happening.
Yeah. And then when you're working on it, you have to find a way to believe. You have to make it believable.
Yeah.
So that's what's fun.
Every so often we'll watch something and one of us will start chuckling and we're like, I wonder what's going through the actor's or the director's mind right now when they're having to try to do this.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun times on sets where people are doing weird things, and then you'll get the take and then you cut or something, and people just say, I can't believe I went to acting school to do this or something.
And there's, like, we like to watch, more genre stuff. It's like, well, eventually, like, you're going to do this, and then there's going to be, like, smoke coming out of your mouth, and then there's going to be, like, this and that, and then something shooting out of your hands, and it's like, okay, go ahead, make that look real,
Yeah. It's pretty wonderful when the imagination can just go wherever it wants, and,
Yeah.
It's wild.
So before we go, where can our listeners, I don't know if you have a website or not, but if you do, where can they find you or find your book?
I have a website. It's just danattias.com, DANATTIAS.com. And if you go on it, actually, the beginning of it is where you can get my book. And then there's a lot of, little clips from stuff I've done and all that. So that's there. Thanks for asking. And it's also published by MWP Press, so you can go to mwp.com or Amazon.
Yeah, and it's called Directing Great Television Inside TV's New Golden Age.
Right. That's it.
I just want to make sure we got that in there.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, this has been a blast. You guys are great. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I can't tell you how much fun this has been for us. It's just been really great.
My name is Linda Sager. I've been a script consultant. I'm an author of 10 books on screenwriting. Our newest is You Talking to Me, How to Write Great Dialogue. And you're listening to GenreTainment.
Well, thanks for the great conversation, Dan.
And check out the show notes for links that we mentioned in the interview.
Before we go, we want to give a shout out to the full band duo McCarty, who created our new theme music for GenreTainment. You can find links to their YouTube channel in the show notes. Well, that's it for today's GenreTainment. Until next time.
Bad monkey.